Now that county fairs are back in full swing, a main attraction for many families is the 4-H livestock showings.
But a new rule means that some 4-H exhibitors won't get to show their animals this year. KCAU-9's Jason Toctasian tells us why in our top story at 10.
Tim and Sophie, the Iowa State Extension made a change to the rules in 2019 that some families weren't aware of, meaning some 4-H kids can't participate this year.
It really is about aligning with Iowa State Fair guidelines for livestock, and it does require livestock that's entered at the county level to have 2 forms of identification for each project, each animal.
ISU representatives say before 2019, livestock only required 1 form of identification to enter in the county fair shows. Cody Griffin, a father with kids in 4-H, expresses his sympathy for families affected by the change.
It's a tough deal. I mean, it's a deal where you feel for the parent, you feel for the child. And these animals, a lot of these animals were purchased nearly a year ago. So 12 months worth of time, money, effort, and energy has gone into these animals, getting ready for today or this week.
Reed Huth is part of Kingsley Pearson FFA. He says preparing cattle for the fair is time consuming.
Well, per day, probably about 2 to 3 hours, depending on how many calves I'm doing. If I'm doing all 6, it could be almost an all-day thing. If I'm doing just my 2, it could be just maybe a few hours.
But for Griffin, he says there is a silver lining.
There's a couple shows after this up in Marcus, Iowa here. The Marcus Fair allows for kids to show up that day, enter in and go to the ring and show.
And ISU representatives say there are lessons to be learned.
You know, what we'll do with this is certainly take feedback and make sure that as a team we can make improvements anytime along the way to do better and be better and make sure that that doesn't happen for families in the future.
Hewitt told me that 6 families were affected by the rule change, but that more than 2,000 4-H projects were entered in this year's fair. Jason Toctasian, KCAU 9 News.